This wasn't originally going to be a scripted video. All I wanted to do was plug a scanner into a computer and show it working. Ha! I didn't realize I was bringing on the full fury of painful 80s computing hardware that has led to multiple weeks of troubleshooting just to be able to do this. Which is still pretty darn cool. This is the IBM 3119 PageScanner, and this might just be the oldest PC scanner ever demonstrated on YouTube. Scanners were one of those products that seemed inevitable. The digitization of printed materials to computers was long speculated on. Just in Byte magazine in 1980, they put out an article that detailed the theory of how a full digitizing scanner could be made. But computers sucked at the time. Sure, there were lots of fantastic machines made in the late 70s and early 80s, but none of them were up to the task of handling the sheer volume of data required to work with scanned images. Towards the end of the 80s, computers were just beginning to be capable of handling the workload, and scanners started to come out to take advantage of it. Cathode Ray Dude did an excellent video about the topic of the history of scanners in general, but today we're going to be taking a look at IBM's attempt to enter the market with the PageScanner. In 1986, IBM unveiled the 3117 scanner for the PC. It was a 240 DPI, 4-bit, monochrome, single-page scanner that used a proprietary interface paired with adapters to connect it to different computers. By 1987, IBM had launched the PS2 line and added a microchannel, also known as MCA, interface card to their offerings for this scanner. But the market was fickle and fast, and the 3117 was being left behind quickly, which is where the 3119 comes in. It was a slight upgrade to 300 DPI with 8 bits of color depth, but still monochrome, and the interface was only able to get 7 bits of data out of it. For some reason, all of IBM's scanners went almost completely unnoticed by the industry and weren't included in most scanner shootouts. That may be in part because they were targeted more towards full system buyers as part of a package for desktop publishing. In particular, the 3119 was introduced at the exact same time as the IBM PS2 Model 70 I happen to have here, and these hit store shelves only 2 months apart. IBM also had a suite of publishing software that users could get with the system that ran on Windows. Nothing here was actually designed for IBM's burgeoning OS2, and I will not be using it in this video. I'll touch more on why later. The general consensus of the viewers that did take a look at these, though, seemed to be that if you were already going with IBM, you wouldn't regret buying one of these. And thankfully today, because of the generosity of Scribbler in Minnesota, we will have the same experience as someone who did buy one brand new. The first thing in the box is the most incredibly important part, the microchannel interface card. This card works exclusively with this scanner. Looking at the card, the chip nearest to the connector is an 8-bit ADC. This is because the scanner works by sending the raw analog data from the CCD center as voltages through the cable. A press release confirms that this is how the 3117 interface card worked as well. So these cards are basically video capture cards that digitized each line coming in from the scanner. This is crazy. Or is it? Later scanners would all use standard interface ports like SCSI, LPT, or USB, but it's harder to say what older scanners would have used. Even looking at reviews, something like the HP 4C I reviewed would have shipped with a SCSI controller card, so reviewers may have mistakenly took it as writ that the scanners needed their own interface card. Overall, I find the period reviews of scanners to be pretty poor, so I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened. They were also very hung up on OCR being an option included with the scanners. Any image of text could have been run through any OCR software, but each hardware manufacturer ended up making their own to go with their machines as another feature that they could tout. This was also slightly confused by the fact that some earlier scanners would actually internally do OCR and just send the text to the computer to avoid sending the much larger image data. So it's all kind of a mess. But still, sending analog video data from the scanner is crazy, right? Well, that's actually exactly how that Byte article from 1980 I mentioned worked. capturing basically raster video was exactly what they detailed in that article, which just feels like a massive coincidence that that's also basically how IBM made these. Back to the setup though. Aside from the card in the box, we also get the manual, which has the software and weird PS2 stuff that we'll talk about in a moment. There is also the custom molded IBM cable. I love custom cable ends like this. The cable and connectors are keyed, so you can't plug them into the wrong thing. And then there is a power cable, and of course, the scanner. It's all covered in this delightful red and blue IBM tape to hold the platform in place. There is no transport lock, and the manual actually states that if you're moving it, you should retape the top. Now we can see it in all its boxy gray glory. I think it was meant to blend in with the Pro printer, but it doesn't have or need any external unit controls, which makes it look rather stark. Now, officially, this is the 3119, but it seems like IBM was also informally calling this the PageScanner. It is a direct successor to the 3117, which externally looked identical, but that one was just called Scanner. Now, I haven't mentioned the in-between model, the IBM 3118, which was a feed scanner instead released alongside the 3117. And in true IBM fashion, that one was known as Scanner Model 20. Great naming, guys. Now, it's nearly impossible to find any information on these three scanners. The 3117 seemed to have been at least a little popular, but after the initial marketing announcements, I can't find anything about the 3119, not even ads. It feels like this was a dud right out of the gate. The scanner market was red hot at the time though, and HP was running away with the lead, so it was probably always doomed. But it's not bad at all, as long as you have everything you need to use it. And for that today, I will be using the IBM PS2 Model 70 that was released in parallel with the scanner. I've got a speculative interlude before we set this thing up. Well, at least I set it up in the past. As I mentioned, there is very little information about this scanner, but many other scanners at the time were using parts from other manufacturers. Some scanners were even just rebadges of each other. But the IBM scanners stand alone in using the moving platform. We'll see more later, but oh my gosh, it is so cool. However, no other scanners of the time I am aware of do this, but I do know of one non-scanner that does. This is the Canon PC-20, PC standing for photocopier. This is a pure analog copier from 1982. It's not doing so great. All of the rubber wheels in it are goo and stick to any paper that tries to go through it. But it has a very similar moving glass platform to the IBM. Actually, it's practically identical. On both, the rear has this brown painted metal channel. The front has this single plastic lip. And the lid even has this stupid solid plastic folding hinge. I think the paper gantry on IBM scanners came from the Canon PC-20, and it would be far from surprising if it did. The laser toner printer mechanism from this was demoed as a prototype printer and then sold to companies like HP for their LaserJet. The HP ScanJet even used a Canon scan engine internally. So it makes total sense that IBM would have used parts from them. It's just particularly interesting that they used this part. By the way, I have no idea what the sensor situation in here looks like. You can't see anything from the top, and I will not be opening it to find out. I opened my AVision scanner after the video on that to clean the inside of the glass, and something fell down into the optical assembly, and I've never been able to get it out. So it's not worth the risk on this. With that though, let's get this thing set up to use. Before we do anything with the scanner hardware though, we have to appease the PS2. In addition to the scanner's card only working with it because of the crazy analog video part, it also only works in IBM PS2 computers because it is microchannel. This was IBM's answer to all of the PC clones, to make their own slot that no one else wanted to use. At least the 3117 scanner was available with other cards to work with normal PCs because it was released before the PS2s, but possibly not this one, and being PS2 only definitely wouldn't have helped its sales. Now, to get an MCA card working, first we have to give the BIOS of the computer an adapter descriptor file that tells the computer hardware what cards are available. It's very dumb, but this video isn't about hating on the PS2. That was my last one. You're supposed to install the ADF before putting the card in for the first time, but you can do it after without worrying too. With that done though, I'll put in the card, and then we can plug in the cable for the scanner, get the scanner connected to it, and then before turning on the computer, I can try powering the scanner up for the first time. Yeah, the red switch on the front is indeed excellent. I was nervous at first that the bulb may have been dead because the filament just weakly warmed up, but turns out it's fine. It just turns the bulb on only when needed and turns it off when not. This is not completely ideal. The color of the light can change as it warms, which can make your scans look different, so keeping the lamp on with a timeout after a duration of inactivity is preferable, but hey, this whole platform was made like the year after the first commercial scanners were even available, so I'll cut them some slack for not doing that. Now, after booting the computer up with the scanner connected, I popped in the disk that it came with again because it also contains software for the scanner. There are two programs included, PS and GS. PS is meant for running under Windows, and GS runs under DOS. I copied these to the hard drive so I could try them out. I launched PS, and oh, that's not ideal. Well, IBM had another program I downloaded before, so let's see how that... Well then. This is going to be a challenge. Now, the DOS program does work, and I was able to scan some stickers I was sent, but GS stands for Getting Started, and I don't think IBM expected anyone to do anything more with this software than test the scanner, because it's not very good. I originally installed IBM PC-DOS 7 with Windows 3.1 on here, and I think I'm going to have to install something else to make this work. And now, let me briefly touch on OS2 and why this doesn't support it. OS2 was IBM's own operating system, and it has a long and complicated story that isn't really relevant to this video. OS2 is heavily associated with the PS2 machines, but the only version of OS2 that existed when all of this hardware came out was this, version 1.0, which has no GUI. IBM released applications alongside this scanner for editing and OCR, but for Windows, because OS2 wasn't really ready yet. The manual for the scanner specifically mentions DOS and Windows, but there is nothing about OS2 in it at all. So I will not be using it in this video, and I will be using a Windows on a DOS instead. But this is where this project just became an absolute nightmare. Okay, now, normally I need to structure these videos so that we have like a nice satisfying story, but this was just a mess from here. I'm gonna lay out all the cards on the table here so that you understand what we're dealing with. The manual for the driver disk says that the DOS program is meant to run on DOS 3.3, and the Windows program on DOS 3.3 or 4.0 with Windows 2.03 or Windows 2.1 286. But I also have a copy of IBM ImageEdit 2.0 that was backed up on win3x.org, and you have no idea what kind of miracle that is. I already mentioned that the DOS program isn't great. Well, the Windows program outright sucks. It is only a scanning tool and can't even view the images after it's done scanning them. ImageEdit 2.0 was released alongside this scanner and alongside TextReader, which was IBM's own OCR tool. But like I mentioned, those were a dime a dozen. But ImageEdit was a much more fully featured image processing tool that was directly advertised with the scanner and being shown using it. My goal quickly shifted from using the terrible software included with the scanner to getting ImageEdit working, because that was the true intended experience and was also directly compatible with the scanner. But this made life so much harder. This was the perfect confluence of bad software, weird hardware, and different layers that all need to be compatible. ImageEdit wouldn't even run on Windows 3.1 on PC-DOS 7. That's annoying, but not too unexpected, and we could assume that it would have similar requirements to the software laid out in the manual. I put Windows 2.1 386 on the machine, which isn't technically supported, but is extremely similar to 286, but with better RAM support. ImageEdit would launch on that, but it hated how the RAM was laid out and refused to open gray images. At this point, I should mention that there was no documentation included with ImageEdit, and how to solve this gray problem was a mystery. At least it was until Ben, who I need to give a huge shout out to, spent a bunch of time messing around with it and figured out the installation method through poking around and brute force. Around this time, I was also contacted by Lucky Bob in Colorado, who hooked me up with a bunch of PS2 goodies for this machine that changed my goals even more. Included was a full set of 6 megabytes of RAM, which turns out is mandatory, and something that was becoming clearly needed to me, an IBM 8514 display adapter. Okay, I need to go on a tangent about this card. IBM released the 8514 monitor and display adapter as a combination of large and high-resolution image display option for the PS2 line. It can show 64 colors at 1024 by 768. although the output is interlaced. This is why this looks weird, by the way. Now, this was the only way IBM intended for you to be able to get even close to being able to see the full gray color depth that this scanner can do at high resolution. You're normally stuck to 16 levels of gray in VGA, which looks much worse and makes it harder to process the image. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an 8514 monitor to go with it, and even though Lucky Bob was also amazing enough to send me an 8513 color monitor, it's not compatible with the weird interlaced resolution. Even some LCDs I tried weren't compatible with it. I eventually found one of my CRTs that could handle it okay enough for this project later, but I also spent a bunch of time getting a profile set up to be able to capture it. Now, the 8514 card itself is also weird. It works by passing through normal 640 by 480 video through one unique MCA slot on the machine, and then, like a Voodoo 2, the card takes over video output when you activate high resolution mode. It also takes very special drivers to be able to use this card, and even more special drivers to be able to use it with the scanner and image edit. Thankfully, image edit comes with the driver, which is part of what Ben figured out how to install. Now, in order to get all of this working, I tested so many different operating system combinations on this thing, which was a painfully slow process. I spent weeks on this, off and on, trying to get it working. I've lost track of all of the things that didn't work. We're talking it's so bad that PC-DOS 4.01 from WinWorld didn't work, but a copy on 5¼ inch disc uploaded to archive.org by Revolution Xenon that I was able to merge into a single image did. Windows 2.1 3D6 didn't work on that, but it did work on PC-DOS 3.3. But that only worked when I didn't use the IBM 8514. I'm telling you, this combination of software and hardware is just straight up cursed. The final config that I'm going to be demonstrating here is IBM PC-DOS 4.01 with Windows 2.1 286. But I have to give another shout out to MXShift for helping me get IBM's XMA PS2 expanded memory solution working with Windows 2, which I would have been screwed without because I couldn't use all 6 megabytes of RAM that I now had in Windows 286, which was crucial. Now, getting image edit working with all of that still isn't trivial. You need to install it from floppies because running it from the hard drive claims that the drive is full for some reason. And you have to do a specific install process where you install the custom display drivers, reinstall Windows 2.1 using those drivers, and then install image edit properly so that it can modify the 8514 palette in real time to show the 64 levels of gray. After all of that, I think I can say that this might be the most difficult piece of hardware to get running correctly I have ever experienced. Anyone who bought one of these would have been stuck on Windows 2.1 forever, or until they dumped the scanner, which I bet happened pretty fast. But not because it's bad though. And now that we can use it, I can show you that it's actually pretty awesome. I want to start with the first real scan that I did, which was of my Japanese copy of Sonic Adventure DX for PC. I did this using the DOS program before all of that OS madness, just to make sure that the scanner would work. And this was the output, which was so much better than I was expecting for a scanner that was just a minor improvement on a model that launched in 1986. There is almost no visible banding in the image, and the 300 DPI makes for some incredible detail. Sure, it would be nice if it were color, but the gray output from this is still really good. On the color though, the bulb in this scanner is green. That would be the easiest color to capture with a CCD, so that makes sense. But it means you get some weird color balance sometimes. Take this box for Star Wars TIE Fighter that is almost all orange and purple. These don't reflect as much of the green light back, and those areas end up looking a lot darker than their full color counterpart. But on the other hand, the scanner at least handles depth really well. Here's a scan of my box for Afterlife, which has some really bad crush shrink damage and warped at the front. The optical path is long enough that all of the box is still in focus and very clear. This would have been great for scanning old photos that may have been creased or damaged. The image edit software also could have done some pretty good processing of those photos as well. Built into the software are a number of features that allow you to modify the image. You can select, crop, resize, draw, erase, and a number of other things. One of the cool features is the ability to change the image colors with a curve. This actually changes live by editing the values of the VGA palette in real time, which I think is a super cool trick. With this, I can also demonstrate a sneaky thing that the scanner can do. In the original SimCity, there was a copy protection card that was black ink printed on red cardstock. A photocopier like that Canon PC-20 would have had the same kind of green lamp in it and would have had the same problems where red would have been very dark and it would be nearly impossible to make a legible copy of this sheet. But with the scanner and post-processing, I can adjust the image contrast and find just the right settings to eliminate the backdrop and keep all of the text readable. It would have been entirely possible to duplicate this copy protection using this hardware back in the day. Now, this all seems like it's working really well, but not all of this goes very smoothly. When you start ImageEdit, you're given a slider for how much RAM you want to allocate to it. Well, if you give everything to ImageEdit, then it doesn't have enough memory to scan. It seems like it uses free system memory for scanning, but reserved memory for editing. Also, it is constantly paging to and from the hard drive using temporary files on the root of the drive. And sometimes it forgets to delete these, and they are very big and will have to be manually removed by you. And then there is the performance. This PS2 is not the top of the line, but it wouldn't have been a slouch either. However, handling this much data brings this computer to its knees. One of the options for modifying images is to rotate them in 90-degree increments with optional mirroring. Seems simple enough, right? It just moves pixel values from one grid to another. So I rotated the Sonic Adventure box image I scanned earlier, and it took 9.5 hours. I left it running overnight, taking screenshots on a timer, and actually managed to catch it redrawing the screen. Now, I replicated this setup in a more merciful image, a scan of the Prodigy's music for the Jilted Generation CD artwork. I scanned this at the optimal 273 dpi because that was the perfect size to take about 5 minutes to finish a rotation, as timed with my HP 5245L. I then did 2 more tests. One was done after adding a 387 math coprocessor. If the computer was doing any excessively complicated transforms, this would have sped up the rotation, but it did nothing, and it still took about 5 minutes. Not sure the 387 is of any use to this program at all. The next test was a little different, using a very rare piece of hardware that Lucky Bob loaned me for this project, a Blue Lightning 486 upgrade card. This gets installed in place of the original 16 MHz 386 and massively boosts the speed of the machine. How much does it speed up? The 5-minute rotation only took 50 seconds. I then re-rotated the Sonic image and it dropped the time to a little over 2 hours. It's not magic, and this is a lot to expect a machine from this era to do. And most people probably didn't do any of that. It would have been way faster to just rotate the sheet and rescan it, obviously, although for something like the Sonic Adventure box, that wouldn't have been possible because it wouldn't fit. But more realistically, most people probably would have been working in 1-bit monochrome images. These gray images are almost all too big to even fit on a floppy disk, making them extremely difficult to work with. And hard drives wouldn't have been that large either. So you would have probably been using the half-tone scan modes that this supports, which are interesting, but oh man, are they horrible to look at with the interlaced output of the 8514 card and visibly flicker on the screen even to your naked eye. So unless you're scanning pure line art, probably would have been better off with just 640 by 480. But with all that said, I think that covers the IBM 3119 PageScanner experience. A super cool and great device with an insane interface chained to an annoying computer with horrendous software compatibility. But it was all worth it to be able to demonstrate this thing in its full glory and originally intended setup. I am beyond impressed with the quality of the images from this thing. It's a shame that IBM didn't make a color version, and this was their last scanner model until some junk models later that don't matter. But I completely understand why it failed. Well, if you enjoyed this video, you may want to subscribe to be notified when I release another one. If you want to help support the channel, you can find me on Patreon. But for now, that's it, and I will see you next time.